The year was 2006, a year that would mark a significant turning point in the world of cinema. Superhero movies were still finding their footing, with early attempts at creating a cohesive universe just beginning to take shape. The Fast and the Furious franchise was still in its early days, thrilling audiences with high-octane car chases and street racing drama, but it hadn't yet evolved into the global phenomenon it would become. Into this cinematic landscape exploded Casino Royale, a film that would redefine not just a franchise but the spy genre itself, setting a new standard for what audiences could expect from a James Bond movie. A film that would redefine not just a franchise but the spy genre itself. It was a bold move, a reinvention that took the world by storm. Gone were the days of invisible cars and exploding pens, the fantastical gadgets that had become synonymous with the Bond name. Casino Royale brought us a James Bond who bled, who felt, who was as vulnerable as he was deadly. This was a Bond who could be hurt, who could suffer, and who could love. This wasn't your father's James Bond. The suave, unflappable secret agent of the past had given way to a more human, more relatable hero. This Bond was raw, emotionally complex, and utterly captivating. He was a man with a past, a man with demons, and a man who was willing to confront them head-on. Daniel Craig, with his steely blue eyes and rugged physique, embodied this new era of espionage. His portrayal was a departure from the smooth-talking, gadget-wielding Bonds of yesteryear. He brought a physicality and intensity to the role that had never been seen before. His Bond was a fighter, a survivor, and a man who could take a punch as well as he could deliver one. The action sequences were brutal and visceral, grounded in a level of realism previously unexplored in the franchise. Each punch, each fall, each explosion felt real, tangible, and consequential. Casino Royale was a gamble that paid off spectacularly. It was a box office success, a critical darling, and a film that resonated with audiences around the world. It revitalized the Bond franchise, propelling it into the 21st century with a gritty, modern sensibility. This was a Bond for a new era, a Bond who could stand toe-to-toe with the heroes of modern cinema. But its impact extended far beyond 007. Casino Royale's success sent ripples through the entire film industry. The film's influence could be felt across the action and thriller genres, ushering in a new wave of gritty, realistic spy films. It set a new benchmark for what a spy movie could be, blending high-stakes action with deep, character-driven storytelling. The success of Casino Royale proved that audiences were hungry for a more grounded, character-driven approach to the spy genre. They wanted heroes who were flawed, who were human, and who could grow and change. It was a wake-up call for Hollywood, demonstrating that even the most established franchises could be reinvented for a new generation. Casino Royale showed that, with the right vision, even a character as iconic as James Bond could be reimagined in a way that felt fresh, relevant, and exciting. The James Bond franchise, once a byword for suave sophistication and over-the-top gadgetry, had a storied history that began in the 1960s. With Sean Connery's iconic portrayal, the series quickly became synonymous with thrilling espionage, exotic locales, and cutting-edge technology. However, by the early 2000s, the franchise had begun to feel stale. Audiences were growing tired of the formulaic plots that seemed to recycle the same tropes over and over again. The once fresh and exciting action sequences had become increasingly outlandish, losing their impact and believability. The franchise needed a shot in the arm, a reinvention that would bring it into the new millennium. The challenge was to retain the essence of Bond while making him relevant to contemporary audiences. Enter Casino Royale. Based on Ian Fleming's first James Bond novel, the film stripped away the accumulated baggage of decades of films and presented a fresh origin story for the iconic spy. This was a bold move, as it meant reimagining Bond from the ground up. The film delved into Bond's early days, showing a raw and unrefined version of the character. This was Bond before the Aston Martins and shaken not stirred martinis, a blunt instrument honing his skills in the shadowy world of international espionage. The decision to reboot the franchise was a risky one. It meant departing from the tried-and-true formula that had sustained the series for decades, but it was a risk that paid off handsomely. Casino Royale breathed new life into Bond, re-establishing him as a relevant and compelling figure for a modern audience. The film's success paved the way for a new era of Bond films, one that embraced a more grounded and realistic tone while still delivering the high-octane thrills the franchise was known for. The casting of Daniel Craig as James Bond was initially met with skepticism. Many fans were unsure if he could fill the shoes of his predecessors. However, Craig's portrayal of Bond was a revelation. He brought a gritty, intense energy to the role that resonated with audiences. His Bond was vulnerable yet formidable, a man who could be hurt but would always get back up. This added depth to the character, making him more relatable and human. The film's narrative also focused on Bond's emotional journey, exploring his relationships and the personal costs of his profession. Casino Royale wasn't just a reboot, it was a resurrection. It reminded audiences why they fell in love with James Bond in the first place, while simultaneously introducing the character to a whole new generation of fans. The film's success was a testament to the enduring appeal of James Bond and the timeless nature of his adventures. The impact of Casino Royale extended beyond just the Bond franchise. It set a new standard for action films, emphasizing character development and realistic storytelling. The film's influence can be seen in many subsequent action movies that strive for a similar balance of grit and glamour. In the end, Casino Royale achieved what many thought was impossible. It revitalized a beloved but flagging franchise, ensuring that James Bond would continue to thrill and captivate audiences for years to come. It was a masterclass in how to honor the past while boldly stepping into the future. Much of Casino Royale's success can be attributed to Daniel Craig's casting as James Bond. When Craig was first announced as the new Bond, there was a wave of skepticism. Many fans and critics doubted whether he could fill the shoes of his predecessors. However, Craig's performance quickly silenced the naysayers. Craig, a relative unknown at the time, brought a raw intensity and vulnerability to the role. His portrayal was a stark departure from the suave and polished Bonds of the past. Instead of relying on charm and wit, Craig's Bond was gritty and real, a man who could be hurt and who could feel pain. This approach immediately set him apart from his predecessors. Craig's Bond was not just a spy, he was a human being with flaws and emotions. This added a new layer of depth to the character, making him more relatable to modern audiences. This wasn't the polished, unflappable Bond of old. Craig's Bond was rough around the edges, a man who was still learning the ropes of the spy game. He made mistakes, he got hurt, and he showed vulnerability. This Bond was a blunt instrument, a killer still learning the ropes of the spy game. Craig's physicality was also a key aspect of his portrayal. He trained extensively to get into peak physical condition, and it showed on screen. Craig's Bond was physically imposing, his muscular physique a far cry from the leaner Bonds of previous films. This physicality added a new dimension to the character, making him more believable as a deadly operative. He was also more emotionally accessible, allowing audiences to glimpse the toll that a life of espionage took on his psyche. Craig's Bond was not just a cold-blooded killer. He was a man who struggled with the moral complexities of his job. This wasn't a superhero in a tuxedo. This was a man grappling with the moral complexities of his job. Craig's performance brought a new level of realism to the character, making him more relatable and compelling. Craig's performance resonated with audiences, who embraced his grittier, more realistic take on the character. His portrayal was a breath of fresh air, revitalizing the Bond franchise and bringing it into the 21st century. He brought a depth and humanity to Bond that had been missing in previous incarnations, making him a more relatable and compelling protagonist. Craig's Bond was not just a spy. He was a fully realized character with a rich inner life. In Craig's hands, James Bond became more than just a spy. He became a fully realized character. His performance was nuanced and layered, revealing the complexities of Bond's character in a way that had never been done before. Daniel Craig's portrayal of James Bond was a revelation. He brought a new level of intensity and realism to the role, making Bond more than just a larger-than-life figure. He shattered the mold, redefining what it meant to be 007 for a new generation. Craig's Bond was a man of action, but also a man of depth and complexity. His performance was raw, intense, and unforgettable, cementing his place as one of the greatest Bonds of all time. Craig's Bond was a true evolution of the character, bringing a new level of depth and realism to the iconic role. Section 4. Beyond the Martini narrative depth and character evolution. Casino Royale wasn't content to simply rest on the laurels of its action sequences and stylish visuals. The film also delved deeper into Bond's character than any previous entry in the franchise. We see Bond at the beginning of his career, his license to kill still fresh. He's impulsive, reckless, and driven by a thirst for vengeance. The film's central plot, revolving around a high-stakes poker game against a shadowy financier of terrorism, provided ample opportunity for Bond to test his mettle both physically and psychologically. We see him pushed to his limits, forced to confront his own mortality and the moral ambiguities of his line of work. Through his relationship with Vesper Lynd, a British Treasury agent assigned to provide the funds for the poker game, Bond experiences love, betrayal, and profound loss. These experiences shape him, hardening his resolve and laying the groundwork for the cold, calculating spy he will become. Casino Royale is a coming-of-age story for James Bond. It's a film about the events that forge him into the iconic character we know and love. By exploring Bond's vulnerability and capacity for emotional growth, the film added layers of depth and complexity that had been absent from previous entries in the franchise. Section 5. Redefining action. The grit and realism of Casino Royale. Casino Royale didn't just redefine James Bond as a character, it also redefined the franchise's approach to action. Gone were the days of over-the-top stunts and CGI-heavy set pieces. In their place were visceral, brutally realistic action sequences that emphasized practical effects and stunt work. The film's opening chase sequence, set against the backdrop of a dusty construction site in Madagascar, immediately set the tone. It's a raw, kinetic display of parkour and hand-to-hand combat, with Bond's movements feeling grounded and believable. This emphasis on realism extended to the film's other action set pieces, from a tense car chase through the streets of Miami to a brutal fight inside a sinking Venetian palazzo. The action in Casino Royale felt dangerous, with real stakes and consequences. Bond was shown getting hurt, feeling pain. His victories felt earned, not guaranteed by plot armor or an endless supply of gadgets. This grounded approach to action made the film's most thrilling moments all the more impactful. Casino Royale's action sequences weren't just about spectacle, they were about character. They revealed Bond's resourcefulness, his brutality, and his unwavering determination. They were a vital part of the film's narrative tapestry, driving the plot forward and revealing new facets of Bond's character.